Hi guys, and welcome back to this week's video from Bitesize Excel. Today we're going to take a look at named ranges in Excel. Now, named ranges are a very useful but maybe not that utilized feature within Excel, and they're particularly useful when you're doing things like using them in formulas or potentially creating lists. So today we're going to run over some of the basics. So let's jump straight in and look at some of the methods for creating a named range. So there are three main methods that we can use to name a range in Excel. The first one is to come to our Formulas tab and come over to this Define Name button. If we click on that, what it will do, in this instance, it's picked up that my name will be supplier number and it's taking that from the heading. And at the moment, it's just referring to the cell I had selected. But if we wanted to select the entire list, basically, all these cells are now included in the named range. This little scope drop down essentially gives you the entire workbook, or if you want the named range to only be available in a particular tab, you can select one of your individual tabs. I would suggest leaving it as workbook. And if we click on OK, we now have this range as a named range. And this brings me on to the second way of naming a range, which is coming up to this name box in the top left corner, just underneath the ribbon. And you can see there that this is called supplier number, that's the named range. And if we were to select this second column, we can then, instead of having C2 up there, we can call this, say, display underscore name. Hit enter, and now this is a named range too. Our third method is to select, say, these final two columns, and this works when you've got a really big workbook. We can create from selection. And what it will do is it will open up this box and you can create names from the values in this instance, we want it from the top row. I'm going to click OK. And what that's done is it's created this named range based on the header. So if we open this up, we can see its total spend. And if we select this one, you can see its total sales. So there are three main methods of creating named ranges. One thing to note is your naming convention with named ranges. You'll notice it's automatically created the named ranges based on the headings, but instead of spaces, we have underscores. This is because that you can't have spaces in your named ranges. So you've either got to have it with your underscores or simply all the words mashed together. Named ranges also need to start with either an underscore or a letter or a /. So you wouldn't be able to create a named range that just said 2020. It wouldn't like that. So moving on to how we edit our named ranges. So it's quite simple to edit our named ranges. What we need to do is come back to our Formulas tab and come to this Name Manager box. And if we click on that, what you'll get is all your different named ranges in your workbook. So the name, the values that are included in that, what cell it refers to, and whether it's the workbook or just a particular tab. You can also add comments in if you were to find this useful. And to edit any of these, what you can do is you can click on it and hit edit. And then you can edit what it refers to, the name of it, and so on. You can also make changes down here. Say I wanted to include row number 22. You can then click the little tick button. You can also, in this Name Manager, add in any new named ranges in your workbook. And if you've got hundreds of named ranges, you can filter to find particular ones. Next, we're going to look at how you can go about using named ranges, either in formulas or when you're creating lists. So looking at formulas, this is where we'd start to see some of the benefits of using named ranges. So say we've got a very large, complicated workbook, and we want to somewhere in it total up the spend for 2020. We can start typing our formula equals sum. And instead of putting in the numbers or trying to find the workbook that you're looking for and finding those particular values, we can just start typing in the name of the range that we want to sum up. So it's total spend 2020. Press tab to complete that and hit enter. And you can see it's very, very quickly totaled that up. And if you've got a really large, complicated workbook, this can make actually doing your formulas a lot quicker, but also make it a lot clearer as to what is included in that formula. And this works with all sorts, so we could do average. And again, total, say we want to do instead the total sales this time, it will give you that. Another benefit of named ranges is where you might use them to create a drop-down list. So if we go to our data tab and go to data validation and then select our list, we can actually make our source one of our named ranges. So say I want to make it supplier number, so supplier underscore number, and it doesn't really matter if it's uppercase or lowercase, named ranges just ignore the case of your letters. And if we click OK, you'll now find that you suddenly have this drop-down list without having to go and find it in your workbook. It also makes it very clear if you want to know what that refers to. Going back to your data validation, you can see that that list is your supplier number. So these are some examples of how you can use named ranges and why they can be really useful. Now, everything we've done with our named ranges so far, we've done via the ribbon. However, there are a number of really useful shortcuts that can make this whole process much quicker and much easier. The first of these is F3, which brings up a list of all the named ranges in your workbook. And you can then insert these into your workbook by double-clicking on them, or say we were in a formula, so go back to equals sum, similar to how we did in the last step, hit F3, and we want to sum up our total spend. Hit enter, and it's done really quickly. And in a similar way, we can come back to our data tab, create a list, and say in this instance, we want our supplier name. We press F3, we want this display name, click OK, and very quickly, you now have a drop-down list of your suppliers. So you can see that that process is much faster than using the ribbon as we did it the first time. You can also use Control and F3 to bring up the name manager, which we opened up via the formulas tab earlier. And you can edit that in the same way that we discussed. The final thing that you can do is if you select your full list, we can hit Control Shift and F3, and it brings up that Create Names from Selection box. So there are three really useful shortcuts that you can use to speed up creating, editing, and using named ranges. Now, so far, everything we've created in terms of named ranges has been a static named range, which means that if we were to add additional data at the bottom here, so say, for example, I added another few values in here, if we go back to our drop-down list we created in the last one, you'll see that they haven't added onto the end of the list. Now, to make our named range more dynamic, what we can do is we can use functions within our named range. So when you go back to your definitions by hitting Control and F3, so in this definition at the bottom, what we can do is we can use a function to define our named range and make it dynamic. Now, there's a number of ways you can do this using things like index or offset. In this example, I'm going to use index as I find it one of the more straightforward ones to use. I'll include a link in the description below to my previous index video, as well as the drop-down list video if you'd like to know a little bit more about creating drop-down lists. But to start, let's just take a quick look at how index might work. So I'm going to start with just showing index, which I'm going to use to identify what the last option on the list is. I'm going to go equals index. I'm going to select my range, and I'm actually going to bring it down a lot further. So let's say to 100. I'm actually going to make all this absolute by hitting F4. And what I want is I want my last row to be the last row that has a value in it. So I'm going to use count A to identify how many non-blank rows are within my data set. I'm going to use the exact same range. And if we then close our brackets and hit enter, you'll see the last one is supplier 24. And if I were to just expand this out a little bit further, so you can have supplier 30, you'll see it's now picked up supplier 30. So putting that into a function, what we can do is we can say equals, we want our first value, so we want C2, I'll actually make that absolute, to that last one. And you can see that it's pulled it all through. So if we were to take out some of these values, it's now dropping back down to 27. So this way of doing the function is basically limiting it to going just up to row 100. You can actually reference the entire column. So if we were to just copy this over, and instead we'll leave the C2 as it is because we want that to be our first value, we can actually take out the second part of this function. So just having C to C, and the same thing here. And you'll find that we get the exact same result. So if we drag this back down to 30, both lists increase. But the difference is if we were to go past row number 100, this list only stops at row 100. Well, this one just carries on indefinitely. So we just undo that, coming back up to the top. Essentially, this is the function that we want to now include in our name manager reference. So if we copy this, go into our name manager by hitting Ctrl and F3, and we can either go into edit or edit down here in this little box here. So we put in our function, click the tick button, and you can see it's looking at sheet 2020 from cell 2, and then this is the index function that tells us what our last one should be, and we're going to hit close. And if we go back to our drop down list now, you'll notice that the supplier goes all the way up to supplier 30, and if we were to add more in here, it should now go up to supplier number 40, which it does. So that's how you can make a named range a little bit more dynamic within your workbook. Now, using Excel tables is another way of naming data within Excel, which works in a very similar way to named ranges. So if we were to insert a table, we can see that my table has headers, it's referring to that data. We're going to click OK. What we can do, instead of having our table named as table 1, we can call it something else. So we can call it, say, 2019 underscore data. And that's now the name of that table. And in a similar way, we could name this table. We insert the table, click OK, and instead of table 2, we're going to call it 2020 data. And in a similar way to name ranges, if they were then start doing sum, and then we start typing whatever we've named our table as, so underscore, so we've got 2019 data 2020, so let's start 2019, open a square brackets, and it will give me all the headers in my table. So say I wanted to sum up the total spend for 2019, and click on this, tab over, and close my square brackets and my round brackets, and hit enter, and it will give me the total of that total spend. And this, again, similar to the named ranges, is really useful because it can make it clear as to what data you are adding up. So you're looking in this table and we're looking at this spend. You could make your names a little bit clearer. So if we go back to table design, we could say this was called table 2019. That might be a little bit clearer. And you can see now table 2019, and it's totaling up that total spend column. When we're looking at tables, the syntax is to have your table name and then a square bracket for which column you're looking at. I've got a couple of other videos on tables in Excel, which I'll link to in the description below. So hopefully this video has shown you why it might be useful to name some of your ranges within Excel or name your tables. It can make it a lot clearer in terms of what the function you're doing with your It can make it a lot clearer in terms of what data your formula is looking at and what data is being manipulated. I do hope that you found this video useful. As always, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to my channel. Remember to give the video a thumbs up, and I do look forward to seeing you in a future video.